Well, now we've come to the fourth plate in William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. It's called The Voice of the Devil. And on this one plate, we have 3 errors and 3 truths. So the correctives are provided here with the so-called errors here. So The Voice of the Devil is this title here, and already we see some familiar images. This upward movement of bodies reaching for something or holding up and offering something, it seems, in this one. And then these 2 blowing a trumpet, a gesture that's associated with war and prophecy. It begins, all Bibles or sacred codes have been the causes of the following errors. And we have some more figures here floating. The figures are interesting. I do think that they're a part of the text, which is why we are looking at the image, the plates themselves, and not just the text. I think that's important for Blake. Not sure what to make of this small infant, and then this person, this woman, perhaps reaching for him or her, as though they're about to embrace. So now we're going to go through the 3 errors, which, as you can see right here, then split by the 3 truths. First error is that man has 2 real existing principles, viz. A body and a soul. Blake, in his anti-enlightenment, somewhat mystical symbology here, is asserting that the division between soul and body is specious. It's incorrect. It's one of the errors that come out of written codes, written scriptures. And this is something that Joseph Priestley and a few others during the late 18th century were writing about. And they did so in contradistinction to the Judeo-Christian understanding of the separation of body and soul, the breath of God and the frame and the clay of man. Also key to this is the idea of the resurrection itself, in which human bodies are reunited with their souls, at least enjoy eternity with a body. So it's interesting. It's going against these empirical understandings, almost Gnostic understandings, ancient understandings of this division between the body and the soul. The next error is that energy called evil is alone from the body, and that reason called good is alone from the soul. And here we have figures crouching together. It looks like 2 figures huddled together, and then 3 huddled in a bodily posture that is suggestive of dejection or misery. The idea is that energy, which is what is called evil by Orthodox Christianity or Enlightenment philosophy, comes from the body alone, and that reason is a faculty of the intellect or the soul alone. And what Blake will do in his correlative truths here is to turn that on its head and say that there really is not an easy division here. Really, Blake is going against this old heresy called Gnosticism, which was condemned by the early church, by orthodoxy, but he sees what might be called a neo-Gnosticism, a new Gnosticism of the Enlightenment era, which will prioritize reason over the energy from the body, which is sometimes called evil, understood as evil. And we'll understand a little bit more about what that energy is soon. The other thing that's important for Blake's whole system is that reason, which will come up a lot in this text, is associated with a figure in Blake's mythology called Urizen or Urizen. Sometimes it's meant to sound like horizon, some scholars think, because it's the bound, and we'll find that reason soon will be the circumference of the senses of the human experience. So reason, very important for Blake in different ways here. And it can become tyrannical if it's couched against the energies of the body. In other words, if the intellect comes to dominate the desires, the impulses of the body, then reason becomes a tyrant. That's what Blake is going against here. Here's the third error: that God will torment man in eternity for following his energies. We see too that the energies here, which connect back to the impulses of the body, often viewed in contradistinction with reason as being punishable by God. God will torment man in eternity for following his energies. Okay, and here we have these these figures. Looks like a leaping horse, maybe a dog, children, a child, an adult, and then this figure here, it looks like a divide. And this figure here, which to me looks like a horse, a grazing horse, but might actually be a dog with that tail. I see it's very strange. So now the postures they're now standing up, whereas before they were dejected. It's almost like it's signaling that transition into the correlatives. But here's the turning point. But the following contraries to these are true. Contraries, oppositions, essential to Blake's work. So here are the true correlatives. 1. That man has no body distinct from his soul, for that called body is a portion of soul discerned by the 5 senses, the chief inlets of the soul in this age. Interesting again with the eschatological or teleological understanding of ages, that in this age, implicitly looking forward to the end of this age, these dynamics will perhaps be renegotiated. Man has no body distinct from his soul. That's the true thing, and it's almost answering the first wrong here, that man has 2 real existing principles, when really he has one, Blake is saying. That the body and the soul pretty much the same. The chief inlets. Of course, that topographical metaphor, the inlets, flows into. So the distinctions, the borders are not quite clear. Now we have this image of this organic spray. Looks like a leaping creature or a man. Here it looks like we have a domesticated dog, whereas before the dog, which animals could possibly represent the body, the human figures, reason or the intellect or the soul. And here we have the dog, domesticated, almost like with a leash, or the man or the woman is holding the tail of the dog. Anyway, the dog is no longer leaping away, but subjected. I think this is important. Here we have someone, it looks like a woman perhaps reaching out to, what is this? Maybe a sitting dog? It's very hard to tell, but you really should work through the images and try to process them with the text as best you can. The second truth is that energy is the only life and is from the body, and reason is the bound or outward circumference of energy. There's a famous picture from Blake's engravings of Urizen with a protractor reaching down and dividing light, and that's why it seems that Urizen is a figure representing reason, who is on the bounds or the outward perimeter of the energy of the body and soul, the desires, the impulses. And we have several figures standing in a line. Something here, this 2 arms outstretched. He almost looks like George Whitefield, a preacher with his arms outstretched and people listening. So this could be an ecclesiastical critique, and it certainly is. This entire work is. But these images could be a religious meeting of some kind, and here we have an animal, or perhaps 2 animals, bound to a chariot. So we have animal subjugation going on in these little emblems throughout, which might be suggestive of the tyranny of the reason over the energies of the body. And energy is eternal delight. That provides the correlative truth to this era, that God will torment man in eternity for following his energies. Really, energy is eternal delight, is heaven. And then we have this strange image here. We have, it looks like a woman, I can't tell, holding a baby that's leapt from the flames. Here we have a wave. It looks like the waves of chaos in hell. Here we have what looks like a male figure to me, reaching out, leaping from the flames, but he's got some kind of manacle on. This could be a representation of what was described in the New Testament scriptures by St. James. James chapter 1 says, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Perhaps this is desire, restrained desire, and this is sin, who's been given birth, which when it is full grown gives birth to death, because that allegorical representation of desire, sin, and death come up in Milton's Paradise Lost, Book 2. And Paradise Lost will emerge in this next panel. Something to think about. You really have to wrestle with these images with the language itself. So let's move to the next panel, or really the fifth plate. Remember how in the previous plate, in plate 4, we saw a figure who looked like he was on a chariot with a horse? And here we have horse and charioteer with sword falling headlong into fire. And this is why I thought the charioteer was the tyranny of reason over the body, or over the experience. Strange. And this is not a good fall either. We can tell from the wide eye of the horse, it seems, in terror. And this fall, it's one of mishap, of accident. And here we have those who restrain desire. Remember the manacled figure at the bottom. Do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained. And the restrainer, or reason, usurps its place and governs the unwilling. And the figure lying on the ground, it seems. One who has fallen, it looks like. So these two figures, I think, are linked. Falling and fallen. And being restrained by degrees becomes passive, till it is only the shadow of desire. Here we have this fallen figure now supine, passive, till it is only a shadow of desire. It's moving into literary criticism of John Milton's Paradise Lost. And here's where it begins. The history of this is written in Paradise Lost. And the governor, or reason, is called Messiah. Now, he's providing a symbolic way of understanding Paradise Lost, which this hermeneutic is key to the way Blake thinks about Christian orthodoxy. So if you're familiar with Paradise Lost, you have a really good foothold into Blake's own system. Because if you can understand how he reads those figures, you can understand how he reads the Bible to some extent. And here's how this works. The history of this is written in Paradise Lost, where the Christ figure is actually reason, the governor. And the original archangel, or possessor of the command of the heavenly host, is called the devil, or Satan. And his children are called sin and death. So there you see that allegory invoked, and why it might be relevant to that last image on plate 4. Here on plate 5, it kind of reveals it in retrospect, and here we have the dragon with wings representing Satan. So it's interesting he's calling the devil Satan here, because in Hebrew it means the accuser. And that's going to be very important for what comes next here. And Blake continues, but in the book of Job, Milton's Messiah is called Satan. Who is Milton's Messiah? We have to go to book 10 of Paradise Lost to figure that out. Let's spend some time on that. Here's from the beginning of book 10. The Son is speaking to the Father in heaven after the primordial parents, Adam and Eve, have transgressed by being seduced to eat the forbidden fruit. The Son takes on the role of the accuser. But thou knowest, whoever judged the worse on me must light when time shall be. For so I undertook before thee. I mean, he's talking about the undertaking of the atonement. Thus saying, the Messiah, Christ, the Son, he's not quite Christ yet because he's not incarnate, but the Son, thus saying, from his radiant seat he rose of high collateral glory. And he goes to earth to accuse Adam and Eve. What does this have to do with the book of Job? Well, if we go to the book of Job, chapter 1, we see the same thing happening where a scene of heaven described by this poet. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all men in the East. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Now, this is regarded the oldest book in the Hebrew Scriptures. And here's the throne room scene, where Satan comes before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking it up and down. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Then Satan answered and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an edge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. So Satan is accusing Job here of false allegiance, or allegiance simply because of the good benefits and gifts of God. And what happens, this sets the stage for the rest of the story. But Satan as the accuser, as that name means in Hebrew, is exactly the function that the Son in Book 10 of Paradise Lost is functioning when he goes down to accuse Adam and Eve of that sin. So let's go back to Blake's text. But in the book of Job, Milton's Messiah is called Satan, Blake says. And here we have the great image of the serpent. So Christ is reason. Satan is desire. For this history has been adopted by both parties. It indeed appeared to reason as if desire was cast out. But the devil's account is that the Messiah fell and formed a heaven of what he stole from the abyss. So this great dramatization where the Son expels the great archangel Satan for trying to usurp the throne of God in his pride, it did seem like desire was cast out by reason, but it wasn't. Desire formed a heaven of what he stole from the abyss. And here we have this strange image, again, the serpent, and it looks like the earth on this side, and someone offering something to the serpent, or perhaps after taking it from the serpent, the mouth. Looks like there's something in the hands here. So this could be representative of the transgression itself. Next it goes. This is shown in the gospel where he, Christ, the Messiah, reason, prays to the Father to send the Comforter or desire that reason may have ideas to build on. The Jehovah of the Bible being no other than he who dwells in flaming fire. And this is a reference to the Gospel of John, chapters 14, 15, and 16, where Jesus prays the great prayer before his departure to the cross, saying that the Comforter will come. But here, the Holy Spirit now is desire. Know that after Christ's death, he became Jehovah. So some of the plates that we'll see will depict Jesus in opposition to the law that Jehovah gave Moses. But after his death, Christ became the one who gave the law, Jehovah. In Milton, that is to say in Paradise Lost, the Father is destiny, the Son a ratio of the five senses, and the Holy Ghost vacuum. And that word vacuum harkens back to abyss. So the Son is a ratio of the five senses. That's basically reason without any imagination. And Blake is not so much against reason. What he's against is the tyranny of reason over the senses, over the body, over the imagination, and so they must be tempered. Note, he says, closing this out before a memorable fancy. We'll have several of these fancies. Note, period. The reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God, and at liberty when of devils and hell, is because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. And that's a very important understanding of Milton, and one of the greatest contributions of the 19th century to Miltonic criticism. It's very important, this idea of the subconscious, that there was something going on beneath the surface of Milton's consciousness that enabled him to write so highly and so freely and at liberty, as he says, of hell and Satan, and so constrained when he wrote of heaven. That's because he was of desire's party. There's that reason was suspended when Milton was in his mode of composition and inspiration. And that against his better judgment and against his better orthodoxy, that subconscious desire, the satanic element in the creator of Paradise Lost, actually won out against the oppressive messianic reason. Let me show you too, important here is Shelley's defense of poetry. Percy Bysshe Shelley, he also speaks of Satan in this way. Start here. And Milton's poem contains within itself a philosophical refutation of that system of which, by a strange and natural antithesis, it has been a chief popular support. Nothing can exceed the energy and magnificence of the character of Satan as expressed in Paradise Lost. It is a mistake to suppose that he could ever have been intended for the popular personification of evil. Shelley is saying, much like Blake is, that Satan is too good a character to be just merely like an allegorical representation of evil. Milton's devil as a moral being is as far superior to his God as one who perseveres in some purpose which he has conceived to be excellent in spite of adversity and torture, is to one who in the cold security of undoubted triumph inflicts the most horrible revenge upon his enemy, not from any mistaken notion of inducing him to repent of a perseverance in enmity, but with the alleged design of exasperating him to deserve new torments. So Percy Bysshe Shelley saying the same thing here. And Shelley's very interested in inspiration, almost of the same kind that Blake is describing here, panel 6. This is really the moment in the work where you begin to get some clarity about what Blake is doing, and it's going to make the Parables of Hell much more easy to understand. Thanks for watching, and until next time.